So as I was saying, this is going to be chapter 4 of Wang Bi's Laozi WeiZhi. Basically, it's an essay detailing the ideas and structure of the DaoDeJing, or Laozi's works. If you really want to get more into the history of Wang Bi, or the text itself, or the previous chapters, because we're just going over chapter 4 right now, check out the playlist. I've recorded all the previous episodes, and so anyone who's new can just go listen to the previous recordings. And obviously I'll add this one in when it's done. The chapter is a little longer than a 3 and 5. So last week we did 3 and it was extremely short. So obviously we looked at a couple of other texts to give a reason to talk more. And it's also interesting when you see some of the surrounding texts and what other thinkers were saying that Wang Bi would have been familiar with. But this one's pretty short too. It's you can see in the tweet, but it's maybe 2 pages of English, if that. And I went and picked out a couple of other older works that Wang Bi would have been familiar with that talk about some similar subject matter. So again, we're going to have some more context or maybe some competing ideas, because I think that worked well when we did number 3. Chapter 4 moves on from the discussion of textual interpretation that we saw in 3 and at the end of the 2. So like I said, I'm not going to go over the previous spaces in too much detail, but you'll remember chapter 3 was largely about how to interpret a text, what the ideas are that LaoZi is talking about, and how the other schools of thought, if we can stereotype them that way, what they're getting wrong in their attempt to read the LaoZi or the DaoDeJing. So we have 2 things, right? The how to properly interpret a text, how to properly come to grips with LaoZi's ideas and elucidate them, and then 2, what these various schools of thought have done wrong. I mean, what they're doing incorrectly. So the Confucians, the legalists, the Moists, and everyone, what are they getting wrong in Wang Bi's thinking? So that was really the subject matter of 3 and at the end of 2. But for me personally, I have some good news. This is going to be, we're jumping right back into political theory and also a bit of, I don't want to say ontology. I guess it is ontology, but more about how things change, like how they come to be and pass away, and what causes them to persist and to succeed. So on the metaphysical level, what is it that helps a thing remain in, I'll call it temporal existence, I guess. And then, and what helps some sort of affair or business culminate in success. And then obviously that will then directly apply to political theory or almost ethical theory, like how can your plans come to fruition now that you have grasped the backdrop or the metaphysics or the context of all things. If you grasp it, how can you use that knowledge now for your political theory or whatever it is you're trying to achieve as a particular person? So I think chapter 4 is, again, maybe I'm just not bright enough to understand literary theory and how to read texts, but I think this is more my interest. And again, if I'll start reading right now, but if anyone wants to talk, just request the mic and just put your hand up or something and I'll let you talk. And for the people who just joined, the text is up on the Jumbotron right at the top of the space. But we're going to start at section 1, and I'm going to end at 3 just to quickly say something. So, generally speaking, that by which beings persist is the negative opposite indeed to their form. That by which achievements are performed is the negative opposite indeed to their name. Alright, that's a little confusing after having been a couple of weeks since we read anything like that, and chapter 3 was about essentially how to read a text. So I just wanted to make 2 points that I needed to tell myself just starting reading this again. I was reading it earlier today and I had to remind myself of a few things. So one is, the things and the achievements. So in section 2 we go, that by which beings persist. Okay, take beings there, or wu. And then that by which achievements are performed. So gong. as we mentioned in an earlier space, one of the ways of thinking about this is, of all the particular things we see, like trees and houses and people, and then I guess the ways they relate or the things they do, like an older brother and a younger brother, two people, but they have this brotherly relationship. If we have beings and achievements or these things, it's essentially categories of these particulars. So even though they're two different terms, it's basically summing up everything. And I guess if we read it that way, he's just generally talking about all things and saying that he can maintain this structure of having two columns here, which we discussed when we did IPS or interparallel. But also he's generally saying that things depend on their negative opposite. And that's the second thing I need to remind myself. What is he talking about when he's saying negative opposite? We encountered it in the earlier chapters, but it's Wagner's, again, this is a translation from Rudolf Wagner, but it's Wagner's translation for distinction or opposition that we were discussing earlier regarding stuff like hot and cold things. So, we said that there's a hot and there's a cold, and then there needs to be something beyond that can support them or be the root of them and isn't defined by them. So this root of temporal existence or particular existence, this source or mother or root, it can't be defined as hot, because then how can it be the source of the cold? Or how can it be, giving rise and sustaining the cold if it's defined by the hot? So it's something else, right? It's beyond it. But also remember, they said it has to encompass and thread through everything we see. So it's a Bao Tong Tian Di. It has to encompass and go through heaven and earth, or all the things. So this negative opposite on which beings persist and which achievements are performed is that metaphysical whatever, the root, the source, the mother, or that thing that's other than these particulars, but yet somehow is their root and source, and is very difficult to talk about, if we can even talk about it at all. And we'll see in some other fragments there are thinkers who say, no, the more you talk about it, you're just talking nonsense. I have to admit, I don't want to pretend I know more than Rudolf Wagner. I don't like his translation, calling it negative opposites. So I looked at the Chinese here, and again, when in doubt, just agree with Wagner. I'm not a professor. I haven't done this for many decades like he has. But English is my native language. I don't know if it's Rudolf Wagner's native language, so maybe I have one little advantage. But I doubt it. He knows much more than I do about this. But the beginning is, so let's go to 2, which I'll read again. 2 was that by which beings persist is the negative opposite indeed to their forms, or form. And it says here, 物之所以存乃犯其形. Okay, so yeah, the thing that's letting the beings or the wu exist, or really is other than or opposite to or against its form or shape. Okay, so alright, so this thing that is allowing all this stuff to exist, or as a source of its existence, is in some way against or opposite its actual physical form or appearance. So the negative opposite there, I don't know if I would say negative opposite. I guess he's translating the fan there, but it's almost like if I have a fence, like you're on one side of the fence and I'm on another side of the fence and we're looking at each other, I guess it could be like that. The root is on one side of the fence and is able to look at all the things on the other side, and it's kind of the negative opposite. It's the other side of the fence. But yeah, the way that these things persist is the negative opposite indeed to their form. So it's something other or off to the side of or beyond its actual physical appearance. And again, the root doesn't have a physical appearance, right? Because it has to be all appearances, or else it couldn't give rise to any one of them. Alejandro, you have your hand up. Please feel free to jump in.
So, in trying to understand this phrase, negative opposite, I'm wondering if this doesn't sound any better, but would it make sense to construe it as something like negating opposite. That is, it isn't merely something that is placed in opposition, but that is somehow actively in the role of negating. And
yeah, do you remember in the past we used a different Wu than this Wu, but the by being no particular thing. So that Wu so we had like a hot and cold, and then the source was neither hot nor cold. It was not on either side of that dichotomy, right? It was a nothing or a negation. And so, yeah, the source is like you're saying. And then I'm assuming that's why he's calling it the negative opposite, because it's that thing that is not any particular. It's not a hot, it's not a cold. It's that which can give rise to both and be threaded through both. Does that make sense? I think that's why he's using negative there. And we did see the character for that and translated that in earlier chapters. That's how I know that he's talking about the source.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, at least so far as I understand this. It just seems like negative is maybe I'm having an easier time understanding it in the sense of something like photo-negative than in the sense of
exactly, yeah,
annihilating negative.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, I mean it's not like a horrible way to put it. It just, for me, when I first jumped into the text again after a week, I was like, oh geez. But the and Young has the microphone. So Young, if you ever wanna, you got your hand up now. Go, feel free to speak.
Hi everyone, and thanks for this space. Yeah, I'm not sure how stable my connection is. Just my 2 cents about Wagner's choice for translation, and I understand your point, and there might be a different way that is more acceptable to some readers. But I think the reason why he chooses to translate it in this awkward way is because in the classical Chinese text, Fan Qi Xing, right, it seems like Wang Bi is purposefully leaving out the option of both a kind of a verbal thing and the opposite of Wu and Gong, or a nominative, like a noun thing. So Fan Qi Xing is just what is opposite of, but it's not really a what, and it's not really a how. So there's no concrete way to indicate what is being meant there, except that it is the opposite of Wu and Gong. So you can't translate it with a noun. You can't really translate it with a verb. So then you would have to kind of suggest something, hint at something. And that's kind of why I think he chooses this weird way of the opposite of. So the opposite of Wu and Gong is neither an activity nor an entity. But it is, of course, what Wang Bi wants to hint at, this kind of nothingness is this other Wu that you will get at.
Yeah, no, thank you. The it's almost like we're doomed to have some struggle with it because of how difficult it is to talk about it, and the entire text here, and as we'll see in some other fragments I pulled for later in the space, all of these authors are saying it's near impossible to talk about. But okay, I wanted to stop though at just 1 to 3 there, because it's been 2 weeks since we actually talked about or reviewed a part of this text where it was discussed explicitly, the source as it relates to these particular things, like being and achievements. And so it was really important for me alone just to read it, to refresh my memory on that one. I'm going to read from 4 to 12 here. Let's see. It is a fact that he who persists does not take persistence for the cause of his persisting, but his persisting is due to his not forgetting about the danger of perishing. It is a fact that he who is secure does not take security for the cause of his being secure, but his security is due to his not forgetting about perils. That is why, to paraphrase a sage Confucius in the Xi Ci, He who guards his persistence perishes, while he who, like the gentleman, does not forget about the danger of perishing persists. He who secures his position is in peril, while he who, like the gentleman, does not forget about peril is secure. That he who is truly good at strength restricts himself to lifting an autumn down, that he who is truly good at hearing restricts himself to listening to the thunderclap. That is the negative opposition between Tao and form. I stopped it there because I think now we have a unique thought, and I think it's a really interesting one for political theory here, because he's basically saying you succeed by keeping an eye out for potential failure. It's like, if you want to be safe in a castle, do you just keep building your walls higher? Or do you identify threats or opposites to your goal and maintain your actions based on those? I guess the threats are kind of a negative opposite of success, so to speak. And obviously you don't want to wear yourself out either. And so he who persists does not take persistence for the cause of his persisting, but his persisting is due to not forgetting about the danger of perishing. So the way you persist or achieve the goal or the gong as well on the other side, the way that you are reaching the success, it seems now, there's a bit of political theory. It's not just focusing on your goal, it's being aware of the context of it and dealing with the perils or the perishing. If you can avoid the perishing and avoid the perils, that's how you persist. And he mentions the xi, so I will, he's kind enough to give us the reason why he thinks it's being referenced. Again, it's in square brackets, so it's not like the text drops the original text drops a footnote to a section of the xi and says, I'm quoting this, but the Rudolf Wagner has given us this section that he believes is being referenced. And I'll read it out. I think it's going to be pretty clear that it relates directly to what was just said and justifies why Rudolf Wagner thinks it's being quoted. It says, the master Confucius says, he is in danger who acquiesces in his position as a ruler. He goes under who clings to his persistence. He ends in chaos who holds on to his order. Therefore, the gentleman, in his security, does not forget about threatening danger. In his persistence, does not forget about the danger of his going under. In his order, does not forget the threat of chaos. Therefore his person is secure, and the state can be protected. The Zhou Yi says, there is doom threatening, there is doom threatening. He stays tied to the mulberry tree. So again, I think that's exactly the point about not just focusing on the thing you want or the thing that you're after, but understanding the context and looking at the opposites or the negations of it and dealing with the opposites and negations. And that point will get developed further in this chapter, which we're already halfway through, but I think this is a really tightly written together chapter. And so my interpretation of up to section 12 there is we've gone into some political theory, and now I think he's going to tie it up again with the metaphysics and show that the way you can understand this is a correct political theory is by having an appreciation for the Tao or the advice of Laozi. It's sort of like if you want to understand this political theory, if you want to do this, this is what the advice of Laozi is, and this is an understanding of the Tao. So I'm going to, if anyone has anything to add or questions to ask or observations to make, just feel free to throw your hand up. Otherwise, I will go into 13 and stop at 19. All right, let me go with 13. He who is secure indeed, but the Laozi says he is secure through his refusal of treating security as a given. He who persists persists indeed, but LaoZi says he persists through his refusal of treating persistence as a given. Dukes and kings are elevated indeed, but LaoZi says their status is brought about by their rejecting elevation. Heaven and earth are great indeed, but it is said that it, their greatness, is achieved through their rejection of acting great. Achievements of a ruler's wisdom persist indeed, but the LaoZi says they are established by his discarding wisdom. The capacity for benevolence is manifest indeed, but the LaoZi says it persists through discarding benevolence. Therefore, among those who see the form but do not reach as far as the Tao, there is no one who does not loathe LaoZi's words. And I'll end there, but 7, actually going back to 7 all the way through 19, to me hangs together very well. And 19, I think, is where he ties it into having, if you are going to appreciate this advice about not just looking at what you want, such as your persistence or your success, but looking at the opposition to that and always being aware of the opposition of that. If you want to be able to appreciate that advice, or if you already do and you follow that advice, you've reached as far as the Tao. What does 19 say? Therefore, among those who see the form but do not reach as far as the Tao, there is no one who does not loathe his, LaoZi's, words. So, if you don't grasp this advice, then you're not going to grasp the LaoZi, or you're not following his advice. And if you do understand this concept of watching out for perils rather than simply building your castle wall higher and higher, if you do grasp that, then you're kind of grasping the Tao and you're understanding LaoZi's words. And I guess to do that, you kind of have to have an understanding of the negative opposite, right, as the source or mother, because, you know, the hot cannot be the cold and the cold cannot be the hot, but the source or the mother or this negative opposite has to somehow give rise and sustain both of them, and is enveloping and threaded through both of them as well. And so if you are focusing on the hot, you might do so, and this is very simple. I keep using hot and cold here, but you might keep it away from that which is cold, so identify sources of cold. And that's almost acting like the source, because you're grasping both of the dichotomy, both sides of the dichotomy. You're not just focusing on the hot and having nothing to do with the other side of the dichotomy. And so by understanding that there's this context or universal thing in which opposites exist together, you can actually really maintain heat or maintain your persistence or have a castle that really is safe, because you can see all the things and react to them rather than just focusing on the one thing you love, and not understanding its context and actually that it is threatened by things. If anyone wants to add anything, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll read, let's see here. Let's do 20 to 22 and then 23 to 26, and that'll be the end of it for this chapter. I'll give a moment if anyone wants to jump in. Otherwise, I'll read on. And if you think my almost off the cuff thoughts, I mean, I did read this earlier today and I've read it in the past, but if you think I'm completely wrong, just feel free to tell me. It's okay. All right, let me do 20 to 22 here. It is a fact that he who wants to define the root of entities must, though they, the entities, be near, from afar give evidence of their beginning. He who wants to elucidate the basis of the entities must, though these entities be evident, start from the recondite in order to point out their root. I chose these three to single out together for two reasons. I'll do the I guess less interesting reason first. In 22 it was, he who wants to elucidate the basis of entities must, though these entities be evident, start from the recondite in order to point out their root. This translation has used recondite a few times. It's not a word that I commonly use, if ever. Again, it means like some sort of obscure or hard to understand bit of information or subject or knowledge. The Chinese is, what is it here? It's like yo, it's like subtle or dim or hard to make out. And so I think maybe recondite is the best word, but though these entities be evident, so it's more like, in my reading, and again, Rudolf Wagner probably means the same thing with his use of recondite here, but if you want to elucidate the entities, like their basis, like their source or where they're coming from, then even though the object or entity itself is so obvious, like, oh, I can see this teapot on my table, oh, I can see the glass on my table, even though the thing I am trying to discuss the source of or the origin for it, the thing itself is so evident, I need to pick up on the recondite or the subtle or the hard to see or the yo, the thing that is really difficult to make out. And then that will give me clues to some sort of deeper thing. So that was my reading of 22, and I think it's exactly what Rudolf Wagner is saying. He uses a word that I so rarely see or use myself. But the other reason I pulled out 20 and 22 is we've gone from the political theory of 7 to 19, where we were talking about, if you want to persist, then figure out the opposite of persistence, which is perishing, and find out the things that will make you perish, and go counter those. And if you can deal with those opposites, then you'll also, and you can also figure out what it means to persist, then you'll have your persistence, right? Whereas if you just focus on, I gotta live longer, eat healthy, and I guess someone's coming around and runs you over, you didn't think about all the ways you could perish, all the opposites or the perishing threats. But we've gone from that political theory or ethical theory now to an idea of, what does it take to talk about the Tao? Well, if you're going to talk about the Tao or the source or the mother or the root of all that is, you're going to need to pick up on the subtle pointers and not just on the thing that's hitting you in the face, the teapot itself, but rather, how can a teapot and a cup both be on the table together in the same context? Like there's something you got to pick up on that's not as obvious as a teapot itself. If anyone else has any comments, I'll take a brief pause, but otherwise I'm going to read 23 to 26, which I think does a really nice job of connecting 20 to 22 with 7 to 19. Young, please. Do you want me to call you Young or Michael? Your username's Michael, so I don't know. Feel free to speak.
ZhuangZi would be the Chinese name, but Michael is also fine. I have a comment kind of, because English is also not my native language, so when I saw or heard you say recondite, I also puzzled my brain a little bit. Normally I would Google the term if I read something like that to see what he could have meant. I know he wants to mean the opposite of elucidate. So my question is, do you know where this word comes from, recondite, what it consists of, the terms that make it up? And then...
sorry to cut you off there. I'll let you finish the other part of your thought. Just quickly, though, he's not... So the elucidate there in 22, let me flip back. I don't think it is kind of the opposite of elucidate, but I don't think in that sentence. So it's got here. So the elucidate is going to be Ming, right?
yeah.
And you're right. Yo or Xuan or something is kind of like an opposite. But the oh, hold on. Let me give a mic to Alejandro there. But in this sentence, the yo is not the opposite of Ming here so much as. So let's read 22. He says, "He who wants to elucidate the basis of entities must." And yeah, in adding his grammar, Rudolf Wagner has broken it there as well. So the first clause of 22 is elucidate is being used in the sense of making something clear or understandable. So he who wants to make it clear or understandable, or so we can see it or understand it. So he who wants to make clear the basis of entities. So, if he wants to explain or make clear the basis or root of all these things, even though the things may be evident, so obvious or clear or apparent. So I think the recondite there is being used as the opposite of evident, because he's saying the entities are evident, but start from the recondite. So don't start from that which is evident, start from that which is recondite. Recondite being, it's like something that's not well. So again, even I have used a dictionary to look this word up. It's just not a very common word, but something obscure or hard to know or impossible to understand, very deep and meaningful. But the Chinese, I don't, and again, my Chinese is obviously a lot worse than my English, but I don't think that yo necessarily has to be about thinking or thought, does it? It can just be something that's subtle or dim or hard to make out or deep, right?
Yeah, kind of.
It doesn't have to do with thought, whereas recondite has to do with thought, like your ability to understand or think about something. It's very difficult and deep and obscure.
That's why I kind of suspected he's pointing back to the Ming, because you look at the Chinese. I mean, you're right that it's in direct opposition to Xian, this make evident. But of course, Xian as a classical Chinese concept has this what Wagner likes to call a conceptual metaphorical structure. Has this part of light in it as well, to make a manifest kind of light on something, bring it to the light. And in that sense, I do think at least Wagner connects it with Ming as the primal, making things illuminated, insightful, and in that sense connected to knowledge or cognition as well. So the way he reads this sentence, I think, is by seeing it as these metaphors, and then connecting these metaphors as referring to the domain of cognition. And if you would translate it very direct, just leaving the metaphors intact, then probably you would use just yo in the sense of obscure or shaded or darkened, because that's the root meaning of it.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little at the end there, but I heard pretty much 90-something% of what you said, so I got your meaning, and yeah, I can see, you're right, so elucidate, Ming, and then, yeah, I can definitely understand what you're saying and how Rudolf Wagner would be justified in not just connecting recondite with evident, but recondite in a sense with the elucidate term as well. It's kind of funny to me in the sense of he who wants to elucidate the basis of entities must start from the recondite, but it's kind of funny if we're going to be connecting recondite to elucidate when the recondite is going to be the opposite, or the thing that isn't going to really be an elucidation. But no, that's a tricky one. I can see why, though, you would make the connection with recondite with two different words in that section. I personally, in my reading of it, was only connecting it with one, which was the evident in the second clause. But yeah. Young, you got your hand up, so I'll let you finish your thought or give any response you like, and then Alejandro, I'll go over to you.
A quick response, because Alejandro was before me. I think you are right that Wang Bi wants to in direct opposition to Xian, so this recondition in direct opposition to manifestations. Ming, I think, for Wang Bi is, and for Laozi, for example, is not really a concept that you would place directly into this matrix of oppositions, because it has the potential to kind of break through, and in that sense be in contact with this concept of the way of Tao. It is something that in the LaoZi you would see Ming is used as a real solution for problems. Like, it's not trapped in this dichotomy of less effective oppositions like that. So the why I do think it can be okay to reconnect a concept like Yo and like Shen to Ming is because kind of a way to have real kind of Ming, a real kind of elucidation if you go through this Yo, this recondite state. I also think as much as you go through like a passageway that means. Okay.
All right, thank you. Again, it was breaking up right at the end there, but honestly, I think we got about 90% of what you said. So thank you. The Alejandro, you have your hand up. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think you guys worked out the conceptual part of this, so and I don't have any strong things to add there, but I'll just say about the word recondite and maybe why it was chosen. This is it was a little, I mean, I guess it wasn't unfamiliar to me, mostly just because I like reading English things from the 17th and 18th centuries, and that's, this is one of these words that passes into, Latin words that passes into English from French and is more common in that older stratum of English. But you might be interested to know that the Latin etymology is given as the verb there, recondere, store away, hide, conceal, put back again, and things like that. And so it has that sense of what has been hidden or what has been concealed when it's turned into a noun. But it seems like the sort of particular uses that, when it passed through French and then into English, it has more of this primary meaning of something that is removed from ordinary understanding, and perhaps also by way of that profound. And it has a secondary meaning of something that is little known or obscure. So in terms of the conceptual work you two were doing, I see both the contrast with the evident and with what is to be elucidated, although it seems clear to me just from the grammar of the English that there's though these entities be evident, we have to start from, let's gloss it, right? What is not evident, what is hidden, what has been put away, in order to point out their root, implying that their root is not evident. The entities are evident, the root is not. And so climbing back up to the beginning of the phrase, to elucidate the basis, we have to start from the recondite. That's how I read this.
Great, thank you. We got I think we have both sides of the word now. We have the English side and the Chinese side, or the Latin side. Thank you, Alejandro. I'm gonna go 23 to 26 in, and that's gonna end this chapter. I do have some other text we can go. It's only I'm on the West Coast. It's 4:40, so we have some time. The 23 to 26, I think, ties it together nicely. So 23. That is why the LaoZi takes things external like heaven and earth in order to elucidate that which is inside the shape and bones, that is, the body. That is why the LaoZi, elucidating the meaning of the fact that dukes and kings style themselves orphaned and lonely, starts the deduction from the Tao and the One in order to display the origin of this. Therefore, among those researching that which is close at hand, but not reaching to the source controlling the currents, there is none who does not dismiss his words as empty talk. Thus, the babblers each proclaim their own theory, while others enjoy their confusion. They either water down the LaoZi's words, or ridicule the LaoZi's arguments. When the clear becomes obscure, and the separate commingled, here is the reason. And that's the end of chapter 4. I said it it's a really tightly written text as long as we're paying attention, or at least if I'm paying attention. Maybe it's easier for others to perceive, but 23 to 26 ties together not just 7 to 19 and 20 to 22. Because remember, what happens in 20 to 22? He's like, if you want to talk about the Tao and get to this context or metaphysical system and the roots, then you need to look at the recondite, and you need to, from afar give evidence of their being. I mean, you have to do these certain things to obtain that knowledge or that understanding, or to pick up on the signs of it. And then from 7 to 19, there's the practical application of you having that knowledge. You'll be able to see the opposites and deal with the opposites and maintain your persistence. And at 19, therefore, among those who see the form but do not reach as far as the Tao, there is no one who does not loathe his, LaoZi's, words. The people who did not do 20 to 22, or who are incapable of that, could not appreciate the advice that would give you 7 to 18. Those sorts of people are the ones being talked to at 19. And in 23 to 26, it kind of restates that stuff. And then in 26, it's like, hey, again, repeating 19. There are people that don't get 20 to 22, and therefore they don't get 7 to 19. And when he's talking about watering down the LaoZi's words or ridiculing the LaoZi's arguments, and he says, thus the babblers each proclaim their own theory while others enjoy their confusion. If we go back to chapter 2, which we read a couple of weeks ago, isn't that exactly what he was saying? I haven't looked at chapter 2 today, but I got the book in my hand. From 64 all the way through to the end, 69 in chapter 2. Remember, he said, when the legalists look at LaoZi, they're like those babblers of 26. They just proclaim their own theory. Because if the legalists see the LaoZi talking about how everyone is equal, then they'll consider LaoZi to be a legalist like them and interpret all his arguments in their theory. If the Mingjia, if the name school does see something in LaoZi that resembles them, then they'll reinterpret all of LaoZi's work as being in their own light. Same for the Confucians, same for the Mojia, same for, all of them. So by 26, I think not only have we tied up this text really nicely for chapter 4, but we've also gone back and reminded ourselves of chapter 2 and 3, which were the textual critique, like how do you read a text, and then Wang Bi's problem with how various other thinkers prior to him had read the text. He thought he had not done the text justice or had misinterpreted it. So 26, chapter 4 itself, very tightly written, I think. At least if I'm paying attention, I can kind of see how it all hangs together really well. And then I love how it brings chapter 2 and 3 back into the picture. I think it all hangs together nicely. There is a note that Rudolf Wagner gives at the beginning of chapter 4, where he says that there's it looks like there may be a large chunk of the text missing. It says there's empty space in the text, and he's not... I don't want to read the whole note again, but it looks like there may be some sort of unfortunate omission in the text or loss in the text between 3 and 4. And again, this text is coming from the DaoDeJing rather than its original form that was in 2 large sections. This, I guess, was not preserved in that fashion and has in fact been chopped into 6 pieces for this modern edition. So it may not be that this... Maybe the text didn't read this way originally when Wang Bi penned it. But however it got into this format, I do like how at each stage he's able to put down an idea for a few paragraphs, then pick it back up and string it all together again. So it's like a coherent, meaningful narrative there where the end is still relating back to the beginning. It's pretty good. But that's the end of chapter 4. I don't know if anyone wanted to comment. Yang Zhongxiu, you have your hand up. Please feel free. And then if no one else has comments after that, I will I will go into the other fragments I pulled out, because we have I don't have to go for another 40-50 minutes. But ZhuangZi, please feel free to talk.
Okay, thanks for the talk. It was wonderful to hear along. I have kind of a question about the last comment about how text we can read in this format now, and how it shows how that the document is
I'm sorry, ZhuangZi. I can't make out what you're hearing. Unfortunately, it's roboting pretty badly. I'm sorry.
Can you still not hear me?
Can anyone else in the room? Oh, no one else has a mic on here. Wait, it's coming in clearer now. Can you ask the question again?
Okay, maybe I should be. Okay.
That's much better. Yeah,
Is
that's
it
much
okay
better.
now?
Yeah, that's much better.
No, yeah. So what?
Oh no, I can't hear anyone now.
It looks like he's having connection issues. Can you hear me?
Oh, I got you. I can hear you, Alejandro. Okay. That's unfortunate. Oh, he's back now. ZhuangZi, I don't know if you're having connection issues still, or it looked like you had dropped out for a bit and then it showed you twice on my screen. But if you were asking about, like, let me just guess what you were asking at, because I couldn't hear what you said, but I think you said something along the lines of how did we receive the text, or the history of the text being preserved to the present day. I want to say in the first, if you go in the playlist on the first chapter we reviewed, we talked a bit more about the history of the text. Rudolf Wagner has written like 3 or 4 books about this guy. I got, how many by Rudolf Wagner? I've got 3 books by Rudolf Wagner about Wang Bi. And although they're not dealing really with the, it's not like all of them are just solely focusing on the Laozi WeiZhi LueLi, but he does go into detail about the history of the text in the a Chinese reading of the DaoDeJing, which is where he also gives the translation of it, and he does have that information in here. Just very briefly, off the top of my head. We did speak about it previously in the first chapter discussion, but this text was considered lost. But it was actually in the 1950s, people were looking in the DaoZi's, the huge compilation of Taoist texts. I'm not that familiar with it, but you would know more than me. It's just an enormous volume of assorted Taoist works and songs and spells and everything from many, many centuries. There was an anonymous text in there. And by looking at fragments of Wang Bi's Laozi WeiZhi LueLi that we did have, and cross-referencing them with an anonymous text in the DaoZi's and some other clues that were in there, the fragments were close enough. They weren't like word for word exact, but it was very, very close for these fragments. And all the fragments we had some sort of either exactly the same or very similar presence in that anonymous essay. And so in the 50s, some professor said, hey, this is that lost text of Wang Bi. Now, then there's a debate about, okay, well, in the oldest sources, we are told by contemporary authors that Wang Bi wrote this book, yes. We have a couple of different titles for it. Again, in the first discussion we had on this book, we went over them briefly. But it says that it's in ZhuangZi. I think it's in ZhuangZi. It had it. This is, well, I'd have to, honestly, I'd have to go look at the text again and add that first chapter just to refresh my memory. But it was in 2 sections. But what we have in the DaoZi's is not in that format. And then they also had belief that certain sections had dropped out or been removed from the text, such as criticism of DaoJia, like a Taoist school, because he's critical of other schools, and then they kind of get left out of the critique. So, the professors had all these various theories about how the text could have been corrupted or changed or parts drop out of it. It's clearly not in the same format as the earliest sources say it should be, but as you know much better than I do, many, many, many texts are like that, right? I think one example we used was, HanFeiZi, who we'll see later in this space if we have time, mentioned some essays by Guanzhong, right? But it's not like HanFeiZi has a copy of the Guanzi like we have today from the Han Dynasty and afterwards. It would probably be HanFeiZi just had a couple of essays or something that were not compiled into this huge sort of amalgamation of random texts that we have today. So it's clearly changed its form. If that was your question, great. If that wasn't your question, I think I just wasted a lot of everyone's time. But I hope that answers what you had to say. And then, Alejandro, I don't know if you had anything else. Otherwise, I'll go and pull up the next source. ZhuangZi has requested the mic. Let's see if his connection troubles have left him. There you go. You should have the mic now. Let me know if you have anything to say. Otherwise, I'll move on to ZhuangZi.
Yeah, so maybe I shouldn't take up the time of that. But my question was not so much about the editing of Rudolf Wagner or previous scholars. No, the text as it is, I'm fine with that. It's just that Wagner presents the argument here as if there is an opposition between these two strands of reasoning, and that can be true if you just follow the way he thinks about his text. But it's not a regular opposition. For example, between security and persistence, it's almost like more they're almost like homonyms in a sense. They're oriented at the same kind of thing, rather than, for example, hot and cold or night and day, etc. So that was actually more my question.
Yeah, and I think right at the beginning of the space, that was sort of the point I was trying to make. Maybe I made it very poorly, but obviously we had Wu and Gong, right? So beings and achievements is how it's translated in English there. And all I said was, just like maybe a Platonist is going to say that reality is consisting of, or an Aristotelian or someone's going to say that reality is made of matter and form, maybe we can just think of Wu and Gong as just referring to existence generally. Just like a Wan Wu Bai Shi. It's like if you take the 10,000 things and the 100 affairs or whatever together, it's just a way of saying all the things. And then by having these two categories that constitute everything that we can see, the Wu and the Gong, he can maintain this writing style as well. And so then it makes perfect sense, like you were saying, ZhuangZi, that security and persistence are being used the same way, because really he's just making the same point twice. And maybe that's a lazy reading on my behalf, but when I see him saying, there's something that helps the Wu persist or to have existence, and there's something that helps the Gong reach its culmination or success. Yeah, he's talking about the same thing. It's sort of the same point twice. And existence, all of it is being summed up by two different categories, so he says it twice. But really, it's the same thing. But maybe you agree, maybe not. ZhuangZi, please jump in.
Yeah, I think usually, and especially how Wagner normally reads this argument, it's not exactly the same thing. He does think there's a kind of, if it's not opposition, it's a complementary comparison. And I think you're right by mentioning Wu and Gong in the beginning as kind of a central orientation for this. And perhaps one way to look at this is, Wu and Gong together make up everything, but there is a notable difference between Wu and Gong in that Wu things really points to the concrete things themselves, while Gong, or merit, achievement, etc., points to the way these things are used. So it's about the usage of things. And that together gives an even more comprehensive reference to reality, if I can say it like that. So if then, for example, Zun, existence, is linked to the thing category, and security is linked to the Gong, to the achievement category, then you can see that, for example, Tsun is simply the more kind of ontological reference to things, while An has to do more with the purpose or with the usage of this kind of political realm. So in that sense, I think at least what Wagner believes, and it can maybe match up with the text as well, that there's a notable distinction between these two categories.
Yeah, would you... now, I'm not saying that Wu and Gong map onto form and matter, but just as a schema of what is this a good way for people to approach it for purposes of being able to read the text? It's just like these two categories together make up what is, and this root is going to apply to what is generally. It's gonna overflow on both sides of that Wu and Gong divide. And so if we said like, well, everything is made up of form and matter, and then we have this root, and we say, the root in regards to form is what allows things to participate in it, or whatever. And then the root in regards to matter, which is now Gong, the root in regards to matter is what allows it to have presence, like visible presence in the world, let's say. Is that a somewhat similar way, even though it's a different schema there, form and matter? I'm not saying they map onto Wu and Gong.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. I think on the one hand, yes, I think from a modern perspective, we can use these kind of philosophical comparisons or this kind of meta-philosophical language to read the text. On the other hand, we should be very careful with this mapping, as you pointed out just now as well. For example, Wu doesn't map completely with matter. Neither does Xing or Gong map completely with form, in the sense that, for example, Wu, thing, in classical Chinese does cover things like events or services or affairs, as well as concrete things themselves. While Gong and Xing is much more than just the material, the form, let's say the ontological form of the matter. It's also the development of the matter, the actual usage, the activity, etc. So these philosophical categories are not exactly mapping, but I think, like you said, to use a kind of schema to understand it is the right way. But you have to be very careful with the nuances there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you offered that comment. That makes a lot of sense to me. And it's kind of how... So I don't pretend to have a great deep knowledge of how exactly to understand the schema of Wu and Gong, or like Wan Wu Bai Shi. Like I can kind of try to give some sort of explanation of it. But if we can put aside having that strong knowledge of how the schema breaks down in relationship to everything, at least as a general structure, it sounds like we can at least try to generally understand it that way, as that sort of schema, without pretending that it really is identical to form and matter. That's good. So what I did was, I knew this was a short chapter. It was longer than 3, and it's longer than the next one we'll do next week, 5. But it's only 5 o'clock on the West Coast here, and I don't need to be anywhere for another 45, 50 minutes. So I went and I pulled a couple of other texts. The last week, what I did was I pulled a couple of texts that were from people that Wang Bi was familiar with. One was actually a letter from... it was actually a description of Wang Bi talking to a scholar that knew Wang Bi's father, and they talked about negation and who Wang Bi thought was the greatest scholar or greatest sage. And then why Wang Bi answered that Confucius was the greatest sage, not LaoZi, and why he found fault with LaoZi, whether he really meant it that way or if it was a roundabout way of speaking. And then also we looked at a fragment that was either from He Yan or some other thinker that Wang Bi was very familiar with, about something being so great that you can't apply a specific label to it, because once you apply a specific label to it, you kind of limit it. For this week, what I wanted to do was I keep mentioning the phrase "Bao Tong Tian Di" is sort of like the omnipresence, or to what extent or in what sense is the Tao or the mother or the root or the source omnipresent for some of these thinkers. And for Wang Bi, it's not defined as by hot or cold, but it kind of envelops and threads itself through all of these particular things that are hot or are cold, and gives rise to them and sustains them. And there's a few ancient texts from about 500 years before Wang Bi that also talk about the ways in which Tao is omnipresent. And if any of these texts interest people, they should go read them. I'm just pulling out little sections that I think are relevant. Whereas if you read the whole text, you'll have a much better understanding of what those people thought. But the first one, let's jump into ZhuangZi. It's chapter 22, and I put it up at the top there. You should be able to see it. I have the book in my hands. Let me just get it up here. What do you have? Okay, so it's like knowledge north. Okay, so the chapter itself is number 22. You don't even know the name. It's like knowledge goes north, or north travels. And here's a section here. I'll read it out. DaoDeJing asked ZhuangZi for advice, saying, "People all talk about Tao, but where on earth does it exist?" ZhuangZi replied, "Tao exists everywhere in the world." DaoDeJing said, "Please name a place where it does exist." ZhuangZi replied, "It exists in the ants." How comes that it exists in such a low place?" "It exists in the barnyard grass." "How comes that it exists in such a low place?" "It exists in tiles and bricks." "How comes that it exists even in lower places?" "It exists in the excrement." Now that DaoDeJing was silent, ZhuangZi said, "Your question does not hit the essence of the matter. When a superintendent of the market, by the name of Huo, asked the butcher how to test the fatness of a pig by stepping on it, he was told that the deeper the foot sank, the fatter the pig was. You don't have to search for Tao in any particular place, as nothing in the world can stay away from it. The supreme Tao is like this. The same is true of the greatest speech. Everywhere, universal, all-inclusive, are three different terms but share the same meaning. Their referent is one and the same. Now, I pulled that one out because obviously it's talking about the omnipresence of Tao in two ways. One is, for people here who like Plato, we have a lot of people who are really into Western philosophy and know it better than I do. Just like we have people who know Chinese philosophy better than I do here. But there's a section in Plato's Parmenides where Socrates gets a bit embarrassed whether or not there are forms for mud and dirt and hair and the like. And I think this section of the ZhuangZi kind of makes me chuckle, because it's like, tell me where the Tao is. The Tao is in ants. What? Why is it in ants? Yeah, it's in barnyard grass. Oh, so low. Just grass? Well, it exists in tiles and bricks. Is it in even smaller and less meaningful things than tiles and bricks? Yeah, it exists in, and it literally says shit and piss. Excrement. But the Chinese has the two characters there. So he's just like, yeah, Tao literally is everywhere. It's in literally everything, and he's not going to get embarrassed about whether it's in mud or hair or anything. He's saying, no, it's everywhere. And then this bit about the fatness of a pig, it's like, if you want to know how fat he is, I guess it's like poking someone in the belly to see how fat they are. You push in and you tell how much of it is fat and how much is a muscle and bone, and how deep the fat goes, I suppose. But for the Tao, it's like, you don't need to do that. You don't need to push in and test how far down it goes. It's just everywhere. So as soon as you make contact, it's there. So it's a very, to my mind, it's not explicitly stated how he thinks about what its presence is. Like, is it an ant, or is it just present in an ant? Is it shit and piss, or is it just present in it? Like with Wang Bi, it's kind of like it's present, but it's not equivalent with it. It encompasses and threads through everything, but I don't think for Wang Bi he's going to maintain that it literally is everything. It seems to have a sort of particularity to it. It's like things will succeed if they are in line with it and grasp onto it, and things will suffer if they drift away from it. So just inherent in that is this idea is there's some sort of other or ability to step away from it, and also kind of an independence from it. So for Wang Bi, I don't think we get a true omnipresence. It's just in some way it's always present in some capacity, or as some sort of option you could go towards. And then for ZhuangZi, we also see this thought that Dao is going to be omnipresent, although in this fragment we can't see, is it literally an ant, or is it just present in the ant in some limited capacity. So that's what I had for ZhuangZi. I thought, okay, that's going to be a text that Wang Bi is familiar with. It's about 500 years older, 600 years older than Wang Bi, and it's going to be informing his thinking on it. So we see that there's this long history of Dao as at least in some sense omnipresent, and in a way that is really no holds barred. Whatever low, dirty thing you can mention, yeah, that's also Dao, or Dao is also there. There's no escaping it. If anyone has any comments on ZhuangZi, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll move to a text that I think has a more clear contradiction or distinction from Wang Bi, but again is still thinking of Dao as omnipresent. So if anyone has any comments or anything to say, feel free to throw up your hand or request a mic. All right, let me go to the next one. We still have time. Good. We should be able to get through this one. It's HanFeiZi. So when we talk about commentaries on the DaoDeJing or on LaoZi, I want to say HanFeiZi is the first commentator. It's so HanFeiZi is obviously a pre-unification thinker. He lives through 3rd century BC. So he's like 500 years before Wang Bi, roughly similar time period to ZhuangZi, and he has a chapter called what's it called? Hold on, let me get this. Yeah, I have 2 separate books. I've got one of it in English and one of it in Chinese, and I didn't put the bookmark in it. That was smart. But there's a chapter called Jie Lao. So it's like it gets interpreted as explaining the LaoZi, right? He's actually got 2 chapters discussing the Lao or the LaoZi, and it's a commentary. We don't know what format that HanFeiZi had the DaoDeJing in. I'm actually just going to read there we go, 205. So I have a copy that I bought while I was in China, and it has a little intro to each of the chapters or sections. And so its opening line to Jie Lao says, 解老就是解释老子作者 okay, so it's so the explaining the Taoist chapter really is an explanation of the Laozi or DaoDeJing. 作者根据自己的理 so it's the author's based on the author's understanding of and we don't know what if he had the whole thing or not. So 全文或部分做了解释. So maybe he had the whole text. Maybe he just had some limited form of the DaoDeJing. We don't know what format he had it in. And then and it says, and he interprets it in line with his own thought, his own political theory. HanFeiZi is a legalist thinker. I don't want to get too much into legalism, but he essentially is the first commentator that we have, or earliest commentator we have, on something to do with the DaoDeJing. Again, not knowing what form he had it in. But he wrote, as you can see in the tweet there, a long run-on section. I just took out part of Jie Lao. This is not the whole chapter, but I think it's interesting because it's going to tell us a few things. One, Tao is not going to be eternal in the sense that we would usually talk about it. Two, Tao is not going to be just the path to success or to sustenance. It's also going to be the path to failure and to death and to evilness. Tao is really going to be omnipresent in another sense. It's not going to be like by clinging to the Tao you'll get life. Well, that's true, but by clinging to the Tao you also get death, because Tao is on both sides. So it's going to be in a sense, not an eternal thing, because Tao is all about change. It's not going to be the path to success any more than it's the path to death. And it's also going to, at the very last part of this, which I found interesting here, again, it's not the end of the Jie Lao, but it's the end of the quote I put up here. It's also, he's got this epistemological theory about how we can come to know it. Because remember, in Wang Bi, what we just read, he said, I think it was 20 to 22, somewhere like that, he was giving this theory of, if you want to understand the Tao or begin to elucidate it, this is what you need to do. And right here in HanFeiZi, he's saying, if you want to, how is it that we come to understand the Tao? This is how we do it. So he also speaks to that. So there's three things that I think are pretty interesting here. But let me, again, I should have put bookmarks, but I have it here. Here we go. All right. I'm just going to read it from the top, actually. The Tao is that which makes the 10,000 kinds of entities be so, and what fixes the 10,000 ordering structures. An ordering structure is a pattern of a completed thing. The Tao is that by which the 10,000 things are completed. Therefore it is said, the Tao is that which gives them, the entities, the ordering structure. I just really want to stop quickly there, because I didn't originally intend to read the top part of this quote. I just photographed the whole thing because it was on the page. But in my understanding of this, which, maybe wrong, but my understanding of the Tao, the role of the Tao in this, is that essentially it's sort of like a water filling out a shape. So you have the ordering principle or structure, and then Tao sort of flows through it or in it, and that is how all the particular things are present in it, So it's sort of like the Tao is somehow bringing to life or bringing into existential presence or connecting the particular things and the organizational structure or ordering principles. So the Tao, as that which gives them the ordering structure, is the delineator of things. So Tao is a delineator of things. It's bringing them into existence by flowing through this ordering principle or structure. Now, each of the 10,000 kinds of entities has an ordering structure. As each of them has an ordering structure, and as the Tao, to the very last, fixes the ordering structures of the 10,000 kinds of entities, it, the Tao, cannot but be involved in change. As it cannot but be involved in change, it has no eternal stance. As it has no eternal stance, it is endowed in the ether of life and death of living beings, in the deliberations of the 10,000 kinds of knowledge, and in the rise and fall of the 10,000 affairs. So there we go. Tao is not having any eternal fixed setting, like the organizing principle maybe unchanging, the heaven and earth maybe unchanging. But it's because Tao is connected to the 10,000 things that are born and die and grow up and then degenerate and pass away. It has that nature itself, right? Heaven gets the Tao and is high through it. The earth gets the Tao and is hoarding through it. The polar star gets it and completes its majesty through it. The Tao is knowledgeable together with the emperors Yao and Shun, and mad together with Jie Yu. The Tao went down, together with the evil emperors Jie and Zhou. And was it the four, together with Tang and Wu, who deposed them? If considered close by, it roams in the four cardinal points. If considered far off, it is always next to oneself. If considered dark, its brilliance is shining brightly. If considered bright, its material substance is obscure. Still, its effects complete heaven and earth. It harmonizes and transforms the thunders. In short, the things within the world owe their completion to it. Generally speaking, the Tao's own nature neither delineates nor gives shape. It is weak and soft and adapts to time. It is in mutual responsiveness with the ordering structures. The 10,000 living beings get it and die through it. They get it and live through it. The 10,000 affairs get it and fail through it, get it and are completed through it. The Tao is comparable to water. A drowning person drinks too much of it and dies, while a dehydrated person gets to drink of it and lives. And it is comparable to a sword or a halberd. The fool will vent his vengeance with it, and calamity is born. The sage will use it to punish the bully, and bliss will be completed. Thus getting it, a living being might die from it. Getting it, a living being might live through it. Getting it, an affair might fail through it, and getting it, an affair might be completed through it. So the next paragraph there in the translation is going to be dealing with the epistemological question. So I just wanted to stop there, but I thought this was very interesting because clearly HanFeiZi has an omnipresent idea of Tao in terms of not necessarily omnipresent in terms of the ordering structure or like the ordering structure being subsumed by the Tao. Obviously the Tao is flowing through the metaphysical structure, but omnipresent in terms of all the entities, and not just in a good way, but in all ways. So, if you die, well, that is Tao, and if you live, that is also Tao. It's all of it. It's sort of the Tao flowing through this metaphysical structure, and somehow by means of flowing through and filling up the metaphysical structure, all of the entities and particulars are existing and passing away, is how I understand it. And so whereas Wang Bi is like, hey, if you can cling to the Tao, you get success. And obviously he has a way of arguing and defending that. HanFeiZi is going to put Tao on the side of that reversion back to the root, right? That destruction as well. It's all going to be Tao. So obviously HanFeiZi is going to have ideas on what you should do to succeed and what will make you live longer or a state be more efficient and totalitarian and be able to unify China. But it's not like the states that fail to unify China let go of the Tao. It just, Tao was present in their failure just as much as it was present in their success. It's just like, what did you do with the Tao? ZhuangZi, you have your hand up. Maybe you have a more insightful comment.
Yeah, I think you are right to point out that HanFeiZi has this comprehensive conception of Tao as also including the negative, but I kind of think that's also present already in the original DaoDeJing or LaoZi itself, as well as in Wang Bi's interpretation of it. Maybe those two focus more on the useful application of Tao, but it's a basic orientation and conception of the LaoZi that the Tao is both the Tao of failure and of success. And to be honest, that actually exceeds this whole kind of Taoist category of thought. You would see similar things being said in, for example, Confucian texts, that if a state fails, that's still in line with, let's say, principles or with the way. It's just that that's the way of failure, which is, part of the will of the way. And for example, if HanFeiZi here uses this term, which is translated, I guess, by Liao as
ordering structure, which I'm pretty sure should be Li, right?
Yeah, it should be Li, I think. Well, I closed my book, but yeah, go on.
Right, that concept itself also already has this dual notion of two sides of a pattern. If you follow a structure, the structure will have a division in what you could call good or bad. And what the LaoZi says in chapter 2 is something like all these opposites of good, bad, beautiful, and ugly, the Tao is running through it and kind of serving as the foundation of it, and by that, in that sense, transcending it. And in that sense, life and death is two sides of the same coin, both for the LaoZi as it is for HanFeiZi, as it is for Wang Bi. But honestly, it's also in the wider field of early Chinese thought that you would see this idea popping up, especially in what is called the so-called Huanglao thought that is kind of in between HanFeiZi and LaoZi. But even in Xunzi or other Confucian texts, you see this notion of this transcending and grounding of opposites by way of a Tao.
Yeah, I think in some of our discussions on previous chapters, we noted that this discussing the Tao in a lot of this language is omnipresent in ancient Chinese works, like you were saying. And yeah, I can appreciate there has to be some way of both acknowledging what HanFeiZi here is saying about, a drowning person drinks too much of it and dies, a dehydrated person gets a drink of it and lives. So maybe like you were talking about with the Confucianist, they will say, there is the way of failure, I suppose, as well as the way of success. So we can still have to, within the context of Tao, be able to talk about some way to success. I have before I go to that epistemological fragment, that section, let me read this other section from the same chapter, I think. I have it here, hold on. It says, generally speaking, an ordering principle consists in the assignment of the square and the round, the short and the long, the coarse and the fine, the firm and the brittle. Therefore, only after this ordering principle, which is Li, like you said, it should be Li, Zhongxiao. After this ordering principle is fixed, only after the ordering principle is fixed is one possibly able to talk about the Tao. Therefore, there is persistence and demise in the fixed ordering structures, death and life, rise and decline. So this ordering structure has death and life, rise and decline, and all these other standards that we need to have before we can really talk about the Tao. And then one cannot call eternal things that now persist, now go under, now live, then die, first rise, and then decline. Only that which is born together with the separation of heaven and earth, and will neither die nor decline until the disappearance of heaven and earth, is called eternal, or Chang. The eternal does not have corruption, and is without fixed ordering structure. As it is without ordering structure and is not in a fixed place, it cannot be spoken of. So I think that section is somewhat more informative, or at least adds to what we've been discussing about how to think of the Tao and whether it's eternal and that it really is something to do with change. Like HanFeiZi is saying, like Tao, insofar as it's being thought of as this thing, like a flowing water that's filling out the Li or the ordering structure or principles and giving everything existence, by connecting the things to the ordering principle and thereby allowing them to be present. Insofar as that's the case, Tao is inherently connected to these things that are living and dying, rising and declining and changing. And if that's what's defining Tao, or if that's what Tao does, then it's not really eternal in the sense of the Li or heaven and earth and other things. So that, I thought that was an interesting bit he added there. But yeah, let's the last thing I'll read was I've got like 10-15 minutes still, so the last thing I'll read is the last fragment I put up there, and it's going to be I think it's bad epistemology. I think it's interesting to compare to 20 and 22. It says, people rarely see a living elephant, but once they get hold of the bones of a dead elephant, they examine their layout by ways of imagining its living shape. Thus, people call that, by means of which they imagine something in their minds, an elephant. Well, it's like the word for image is what do you call it, like homonymous or something with an elephant. Now, although one is neither able to see nor hear the Tao, the sage holds on to its visible effects by way of envisioning its shape. That is why the LaoZi says it is the shape of something shapeless, the image of no particular thing. Where is it here? It says, although one is not able to see or hear the Tao, the sage holds on to its visible effects by way of envisioning its shape. So just like we can see the bones of a dinosaur or an elephant or something, and then piece it together and try to imagine what it actually is, it's kind of like the sage, we can't see or hear the Tao, but we hold on to the visible effects, or the things in the world, and can kind of get it that way. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting epistemological point, or a way of constructing an understanding of the Tao, and it does relate, I think, to what Wang Bi says in chapter 4. Not that it necessarily means the same thing as what Wang Bi said, but it's the same topic. It's like, how do you come to elucidate the things, the entities? How do you come to understand or explain the Tao? It's kind of like, well, here's HanFei's position on it. You can see its effects. And so just like you can find the bones of a long dead elephant or dinosaur and try to piece them together into some sort of a semblance of what it might have been or what it might be, so with the Tao, if you are looking at the recondite and all the other signs and effects that you can detect, then you can piece something together about it. But that was the last section I pulled out. Like I said, chapter 4 was a short one, not as short as 3, and still longer than 5 that we'll do next week. But the idea of omnipresence of existence is always interesting to me. But for me, the Taoists don't really line up with my own opinions on omnipresence. For example, here in HanFeiZi, where we're saying like the Tao fills out the ordering structure, connects the ordering structure with the things and somehow fills them out and pushes them through it. The Tao is present or has some sort of influence on all the things, but it's not really omnipresent in the sense we might think of it being literally all things, like being writ large, because obviously the Tao is not the Li, right? And I think when I hear, and ZhuangZi, you made good points, but when I hear someone say, by clinging to the Tao you'll have success, and by letting go or losing sight of it you'll fail. Obviously that's not HanFei. HanFei isn't saying that here, but sometimes you detect things like that, or that's said in other texts, and then it's like, well, then the Tao isn't really failure. Although just like, it's, Tao is just the path to success, or the way to persistence, and is not the is not failure, is not death, or is not this other that's trying to be avoided. Although, like you said, ZhuangZi, for some they will have the idea of Tao in a broader sense, and then they will have the way of failure and the way of success. But I like the discussions of omnipresence. It's just, it's not, you can't be so quick just to equate something like the omnipresence of being that we might find in certain readings of Parmenides to the omnipresence of not just Plato, obviously with being and non-being and things, and the Sophist and elsewhere, but also if we wanted to do a cross-cultural to the East, again, it's you can't just so quickly assume that Tao in all things, even in the piss and shit, even in the ants and the bricks, you can't be so quick to assume that it means it in the same sense of like an all-subsuming whole where it literally is identifiable with that, rather than just Bao Tong Tian Di. encompassing and threading through it, but in some way distinct, or in some way more limited. It's a puzzle. But yeah, I thought I'd pull those fragments about omnipresence and the Dao, and see if anyone had any comments. Otherwise, I might wrap it up. But if anyone has anything to add, or any questions, or any ideas on omnipresence, please put your hand up. Zhongxiu, I see you have your hand up again. Please jump in.
Yeah, sorry to take up the space, but no, I really like that you quoted HanFeiZi on that epistemological point just now, because it reminded me of Guo Xiang, a commentator of the ZhuangZi, who lived not shortly after Wang Bi, and he has a famous comment on how the Tao can be kind of approached through the traces it leaves behind in things. Like, you can't approach it directly, but it's more like in the shadows, in the leftovers, in the sparks that it leaves behind. And it kind of, to me, echoes already in HanFeiZi in the part that you quoted just now. But it's interesting that those two are similar. But thanks.
I'm just laughing because when I was picking out the fragments to use, I was almost just going to go with Guo Xiang instead of pulling one from HanFeiZi, because I knew I was going to go with the ZhuangZi for that bit about the Taoism and all these lowly things. And then I have the copy from recently. I don't know how recently. I got it recently, but this text was probably printed maybe a year or two ago. Hold on. But they released a full translation of the ZhuangZi and the Guo Xiang's commentary on it, translated by Richard Lin. And so I have a copy of that, and I've read part of it. I haven't read all of it. I've read the ZhuangZi by itself, but I haven't read the full Guo Xiang commentary. I'm still working my way through it. But yeah, I almost went with Guo Xiang today and left HanFeiZi out, but I'm kind of glad I didn't. So I'm happy you appreciate the HanFeiZi quote. It was very almost just ZhuangZi and Guo Xiang. Noku, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this space. One of my favorite things on this app is your pronunciation of these Chinese names. It's great. One question: how does Dao relate to the Logos?
Well, how does a Dao relate to the Logos? That's a big question, right? I mean, we've been going over different thinkers having different accounts of how to know the Tao and in what sense it is omnipresent and what role it plays. And then just talking about the Logos, I know from prior discussions with you, Noku, that you have a very particular idea of the Logos, and you think that the Logos could be expressed in a person or in an entity that is both 100% divine and 100% human. Or I don't want to state the argument for the Trinity, but I'm laughing because I almost feel like not only is the Logos, we would have, it's like, I'm not going to say that I have like that as something I have a very strict and clear definition for by itself and that I frequently discuss. But two, to the extent that I would discuss it, I also think that we have very different understandings of it. Because any understanding of a Logos or like a thread of reason that runs through all things, like we say the Tao is, enveloping and threading through all things in some capacity. If we are going to posit a Logos, a reason or a word or something that envelops and threads through all things and gives them meaning, or is that by which they have meaning, if we wanted to posit that sort of model, there's no way that I could accept it being particularized as a person who would come and save us. But if I'm to answer your question, that I think your understanding of Logos would be different than the one that I would try to defend. And so it's almost like a question that, because I know I have a lot of trouble with it.
No, my question was more so, how does it relate? And that was an attempt to receive a Logos from you or an account. I don't share without. I ask you because I don't want to put myself into it because this whole thing about models and systems, I'm skeptical of. So it was simply a question to get an account from you as to what you have to say about the relationship between Logo to DAO. That was all. Without putting myself in or anything like that, I come into the space listening and seeking to understand from these wise men and yourself.
I got you. No, it's I wasn't trying to give you a hard time. I just was laughing to myself. It's just to answer the question. I need to first understand what the scope or the role of logos is. And so, if we're having a metaphysical discussion, I'm Eleatic in the sense that I think there just is what is, and that's an all-subsuming whole, and the reality is a perfect and complete whole. And then what is my frustration with discussions of logos or Tao? It's that there needs to be more to the picture. If we in these discussions of Tao, where the Taoist person is saying something like, "Oh, the Tao fills out the ordering principle, and by flowing through the ordering principle or structure, it connects it to the various entities and gives them existence." So there's this metaphysical structure, there's the potential of all these 10,000 things, and the Tao flooding through the metaphysical structure brings them all to life. Well, then Tao is not equivalent to being, right? Tao is just part of the puzzle. And in all my philosophical or metaphysical thinking, I believe that when I get to that broadest thing, being or what is writ large, everything within that context has to abide by the nature of being or certain ramifications of there just being this one perfect thing. For example, change becomes a very tricky subject because there shouldn't be anything genuinely new because being is perfect and complete. And so if being is perfect and complete and is all there is, then there shouldn't be any new things coming to be. And so many of these discussions of Tao are not well, they use a lot of language of change and it causes a lot of troubles. And similarly with logos, again, logos is not equivalent to being. Logos, depending on which philosophical tradition or definition or way we're going to stick it into this model, is just going to be part of it. Like maybe it's like some principle that gives things meaning, and the things have some sort of presence apart from the meaning, but it's by logos that you understand it. I don't think Tao is. I would draw this comparison if we want to connect them quickly. If you wanted to say that things have existence via logos, like logos is this sort of flame or energizing substance or principle that by which things come to have existence in some sort of spatial world or knowable world, and then when they let go of the logos they fade away or die off or pass away, then yes, you could compare it with the Tao then, because obviously the Tao for some of these thinkers is the root or source by which things come to be, and then it's almost like a Wang Bi is at time calling it a mother, right? LaoZi, someone to call a mother or a feminine, and so it's also sustaining them. Just like the logos may be this thing within reality that sustains things in existence. And so Tao is sustaining them in existence. And then if they drop away from the Tao or they do not follow certain types of Tao, they will revert back to the mother, or they will be consumed again by the not an apeiron, but the mother or source or root. And so if logos is having that function in a broader metaphysical system, then sure, Tao can be compared to it in many ways. But my general interest, or what I am always hung up on, is the metaphysical system writ large, and then the ramifications of that. And so when we say oh, you have to cling to Tao, or you'll revert back to the mother, I'm like, well, no, because every single arrangement, like me sitting at my table, me talking to Noku on Twitter Spaces, it's eternal, and it doesn't revert to the Tao. Maybe tomorrow I revert to the Tao, but today I'm still here. Every single moment is inviolate. So I don't need to worry about reverting to the mother. That's just whatever is possible is inevitable, and maybe tomorrow I do revert to the mother, or the logos kicks me out of existence. But it can't kick me out today because I exist necessarily, and there's no change. And Dao can't do anything to me either today because I was here and I'm inviolate, just like everything that exists, every arrangement, all of it is inviolate. I hope that's an answer, but it's me trying to struggle with some concepts that I don't always adopt or think enough about myself.
Yeah. I get the impression, given what you've said, that they are in a sense synonymous.